So good morning, welcome. I'd like to welcome you to our Alumni Insight Lecture with David Hashim. David Hashim is a member of our Alumni Council here at the GSD. He's a class of '86. So in his role as an Alumni Council member, he serves as an ambassador and an advocate for the GSD locally and for the ASEAN region. He's been a great volunteer and advocate for the school. He's participated in some of our studios in the area in Jakarta, and also the last two studios in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, his home. So David, welcome. Thank you for joining us and sharing your story. So a little bit about David. He's founded the firm VERITAS, which is a global design firm in 1987 in Kuala Lumpur after graduation from the GSD. It's a large design practice with offices from London throughout Asia and then even into Australia. They're designing across sectors and scales in hospitality, residence, healthcare, and education, working on transforming the skyline of Kuala Lumpur with projects as high as 80 stories, but then also on smaller scales in individual residents as well. VERITAS is the largest multidisciplinary design studio in Malaysia. Is also one of the top 10 ASEAN firms. Prior to joining the GSD, attending school at the GSD, David attended a school down the street in Cambridge. He is, upon graduation from the GSD, he was a recipient of the Aga Khan Traveling Fellowship for Research in Islamic Architecture. So David, welcome back to the GSD, and look forward to hearing more about your practice.
Thank you very much, Brad. Well, it's wonderful to be back here. I left here 31 years ago. And hi, nice to have you here too. Yeah, thank you for coming. And I must say that even though we have a small crowd here, I am a little bit intimidated. Not because the size of the crowd. I've just come from Dubai where I spoke to a room of about 500 people. But why this is intimidating is I remember when I was sitting in those chairs where you are right now, back when I was here, and hearing lectures from visiting professors and visiting architects, and many times I was thinking, like, what an idiot! What rubbish are we wasting our time here on? So I'm just worried that you're sitting there thinking the same thing that I did, and that's why I'm a little bit intimidated. But anyway, let's see what we can do. I've got an interesting two topics to talk about today. The first one is here, but it's not going to take all the time. So I've actually got another paper, the one I gave in Dubai last week, which I think is very interesting from a design point of view. This is more from a professional point of view. This first presentation is about my personal experience of starting a small practice 31 years ago and to what it has become today and how it was done. So this is who we are. If we need to say what we are in one sentence, it is this. We feel that we are one of the world's leading integrated multidisciplinary design firms. We started as architects, but slowly over time we have the landscape division, we have the interior design, planning, project management, quantity surveying, environmental division, and so on. And so this is what we say we are in one breath. So a little bit about us. We were formed in '87. As soon as I graduated from the GSD, I just went out and started the practice right away. So I've actually never had a job. So often when I made mistakes when I was young, I said, well, I don't have any experience, give me a break. So I've never had a job. And we grew very fast. We started exporting in the 90s at a point when we began feeling confident about our ability. And export of services is something very different. You work in your own home country. After a while, you get used to the process. And it takes a very different way of thinking when you start to expand and travel around the world. So now we've worked in 20 different countries. I've just come back from India. I was in Dubai. I'll be in London. Soon after that, I'll be in Myanmar and Vietnam. So that's the kind of life that I lead. So we currently have these 6 offices. We are fully multidisciplinary, and this is something that's unique because here in the US, people tend to be pigeonholed into disciplines. But we find that more and more around the world, people want a total solution. They don't want to think about design from all these different angles. They want a single way of design. The Germans called it Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. And so that's really what's happening around the world. Today, our work is about 20% outside our own country, and we're about 350 people, making us quite large. So this is what I was like in 1987. Susan remembers me when I was like that.
I have to say, knowing David back then and knowing what he's accomplished, all I can say is, of course. I mean, you were obviously going to go set the world
Well,
alight.
and obviously those in the room are going to do the same thing, because I was in your seats then. So we started, 3 of us, myself and 2 friends, and today we are there. You know, this book came out, and you should pick it up. It's called Different, and it's about how, you know, when there are big trends, mega trends, everyone seems to want to follow that trend. But what's important in a herd is to be careful, because it might sound like a great idea and everyone's moving in a certain direction, but this is what happens. And if you're not careful and you know your way through, you're going to be, you know, that victim. So what is it? How do you maneuver through a world of complexity? Now, what I did is I began, when I started my practice, look inside. I didn't try to, you know, create something overnight, but I said, look, who am I? What am I? And how can that translate to eventually a corporate culture that is unique? So I don't follow the herd. And the thing is that I looked at my own particular ethnic nature. I'm Malaysian, but I am of different parentage. It's very complicated. I was born in one religion. I don't really practice that, and I've dabbled in others. My wife is of a different religion than me, and that's all interesting for me. And embedding that culture into the company with an open and exploratory attitude. A spirit of adventure. I've always been very adventurous. And so embedding that DNA so that everybody in the organization thinks the same way and looks for opportunities outside their comfort zone. And then developing strategies. So having all these ideas is great, but unless you sit down and do the hard work of thinking about strategy, it's not going to succeed. And then tying the brand to this international culture. Brand is very important when you start to become bigger. It's all about brand. So that's me, you know, and in my family, you can see my family, we're like 8 different nationalities, 4 different religions, we speak we speak half a dozen different languages. And that's sort of who I am, and that's me and my family. And so this is what Veritas is. It's a larger reflection of myself. So this is me and the 2 other key people at Veritas. Lillian is a Princeton grad, Asif is Berkeley. So we're a very American company in some sense. And Peter is from UK, Anton is from Melbourne, Richard runs Portland. He doesn't look like he's Vietnamese, but his wife is Vietnamese and he speaks Vietnamese. And of course, Mahendra runs Mumbai. So this is the kind of diversity that one of the things we do is we celebrate our global culture in so many different ways in the office. I'm always reminding people that we are not a local firm, that we have that view of larger. So for example, we have what we call our world wall. Remember this, guys? You remember this? Okay, your picture's been taken off. You've left. And if you look at the office, the people that are there from South Africa, from Colombia, and this is what's important, because when you have diversity in your office, we're a little bit like the United Nations. When you have a diversity of people, then you have a diversity of ideas, and that's very important to us. We love celebrating this in many ways. In fact, last month we had a big party where we celebrate different parts of the world. So this is the winning team. I'm not really sure where they're from, but they won because they had so much energy. I'm sure you guys will recognize some of the faces there. So celebrating this cultural thing. For me, I call the way I work and the way Veritas works is like a chameleon. And people say, oh, that's a very negative connotation. That means you're wishy-washy, you can be anything. And for me, it's like a paradox, because if you are the kind of animal that can change colors very quickly, actually you're pretty damn unique. In the world of animals, there's only one animal that can do it. So I believe in the ability to adapt whenever we work in different countries, and that takes a certain mindset. So for example, I could be in Iran, and it's Friday, and you know what? I'll go for prayers, because that's what they would expect me to do. But I could be on a plane the next day, and I'll be in Vietnam, and I'll go karaoke with these bar girls, because that's what the clients expect you to do. And if you want to work in these different environments, you have to learn how to eat the food, you have to learn how to drink the drink, and be part of it. Because if you say, no, I am this, you can pretty much say goodbye to a global way of thinking about practice. Thomas Friedman wrote this book, The World is Flat, and what it suggests is that any company, from even the smallest, and Malaysia is a developing country, we're actually quite poor compared to the US and other countries, but in a way, because of technology, it's flattened the world. A small firm from Malaysia can do things that big firms, and we're leapfrogging the technology to be able to do that. So we set ourselves a very clear goal. This is in black and white. It's on our name tags. It's on our wall and everywhere in our office. And that was our goal. And we continue to strive. And it's vague enough that it's something that you can never actually reach. If you think you've reached it, you can still carry on. And so it's a very aspirational statement. Our core values, those are the core values. And we actually built the core values into a statement of aspiration, what we call our tribal mantra. So the core values for the world, and that's what we practice. This mantra appears in many different places and ways. In every year, we used to have a yearly theme. Go, Go Global was 2008. In 2010, we said ideas for the world, and it's been kept permanent after that because everyone said this is a great way to think about our position in the world. So guys, did you bring your badges? So everyone's got to wear this badge. It's a statement of aspiration. And whether it's the clocks in the office or continually reminding people by having maps of the world, this is a way of instilling that belief that we are going to be, if not already, we're not really truly global yet, we will be one day. Another practice that we've taken on, because we do work around the world, we have different studios that work in 4 different zones. So for example, in Dubai and Malaysia are 4 hours different. So to be able to serve the Dubai market, we create a studio which has a different time zone. So they come in later and they go home later. And the same for different parts of the world. And that is very useful because clients there can then interact with us because of this adjusted working hours. The interconnected world, and this goes back to what Thomas Friedman said about the flat world. If you really know how to work technology, you could be anything you want. And so we really adopted these ideas really wholeheartedly and spent fortunes on creating the perception that we are bigger than we are. By the way, I always believe in over-promising. The way we got the first big job back in 1987 is a client asked us how big we were because they wanted to give us a project. And I asked them, well, how big do you need to be? And they said, oh, this is a big job. You need to have at least a dozen or more people. We had like 4 people in the office. And I said, no, we have that many people. Lying through my teeth. So the client said, well, in that case, that's great. I'd like to come and visit you guys. Oh, shit. So I had 2 days to call all my friends, come sit in my studio with their work, and we got the job. And within a short time, we grew to the size that we needed to be. So I always believe in over-promising. And that's one of the ways that we've gotten to where we are. Yeah, that's one way you could put it. And frankly, if we had failed in that job, we would have been called out. We would have been called out. But fortunately, we've been lucky all along.
Isn't that what we criticize Trump for?
Yeah, okay. That's true. Our presence online is very important, whether it's through any of these mediums to present ourselves. And I mentioned earlier about being able to provide all the services under a single entity, which is very important globally. So we created a protocol which we call the VERITAS Integrated Professional Services, or VIPS. And the sweet spot is that red dot. And there are a few projects that we provided all these services in-house, including the engineering part. Marketing material, we were very clear from very early days. This goes back, 30 years almost. We found someone to run our global enterprise and build the global practice. So a lot of marketing material was built and created for that purpose. Brochures, videos, and so on. So this is where we were in 2000 with only one office in Kuala Lumpur. This is us today. And like we said, our aspiration is to be much more present. We have an office in Portland, although it's a bit quiet right now. We're thinking of moving that office to San Francisco. So one of the things that I'm always thoughtful about, being able to grow the brand, is I love to speak at international fora. This is the fourth conference or fourth speech I've given this year. We participate in international exhibitions. We network with various organizations. We benchmark with global industry leaders. We participate in many international competitions. We love being featured in publications, employing international staff. We have an English-only policy in the office. Although you come from all these different countries, you have to speak English. That way you don't exclude certain people. ISO is a very important standard, international standard. It's not very important here in the US, but in the UK and the rest of the world, ISO is a standard of quality, which we've adopted. Leveraging on international contacts and publicizing our international accomplishments. So through all these activities allows us to expand throughout the world. I'm going to talk a little bit about design now. The world is becoming more and more complicated. Cultures are intermixing with each other far more deeply than they used to. So when we work in a different country, outside our own culture, we have to quickly learn about what is important to them. Their religious aspects, which manifest in architecture, their local materials, for example, that manifest in the architecture, and their traditions and history. So this is the kind of composition that of cultures, especially in Asia, where we have to learn about them very quickly and bring them into our work. So let's see some examples of that. Oh, before that, so this idea of cultures interacting and intermixing, you don't even know what this is anymore. Is this Western? Is this Asian? Is it South American? We don't know. And this is happening in all the fields of human interaction. Whether it's cuisine or art, everything is becoming fused. And the designers who understand and can understand different cultures and different histories and traditions are those who will succeed in the world today, whether it's fashion or architecture. And so practitioners today need to understand the different traditions in the world and find ways to work within them. So for example, the work that we do in Iran, we used to have an office in Tehran. We've closed it now after the revolution, after the Green Revolution, happened a few years ago. So this is one of the towers that we've designed outside Tehran, and it takes certain aspects of the local cultural elements, the Islamic elements, the domes, the arches, and interprets them differently into a high-rise structure. One is an office tower, and the other one is a residential tower. This project in Dubai is a shopping mall that was completed a few years ago. It's a brand new building. But it interprets, it interprets using the same materials, which is a particular kind of stucco that you see in the typical architecture of the old city, and the wind chimneys. They call these wind chimneys, which are used to bring in the air to cool the buildings down. So you don't need to have so much air conditioning. So we've introduced them as well. So this is a brand new building, and it's probably just a block away from the more traditional quarter. So this is our work in Dubai. In Yemen, where we've also done some buildings, this is a Hyatt hotel on the coast near Aden. What we did is we looked at the traditional architecture of Sana'a. If anyone been to Sana'a, it's a beautiful UNESCO heritage city, studying how things are organized and how things are built, and reinterpreting that into a modern composition, including, in fact, an interpretation of the minaret, which is a particular Islamic motif, into the overall composition. And so this was a 300-room Hyatt hotel in Sana'a. A project in Nepal, Kathmandu, I was just there. They have a great tradition of brickwork and incorporating brick and timber into their fenestration. You can see some traditional buildings here. And this is the new Intercontinental in Kathmandu, where we interpret that in a more abstract manner, using the same brick material and timber that you can see reinterpreted here in the windows. In China, where we have some work, you can't do work in China unless you know this one word, Feng Shui. Anyone knows what Feng Shui is? Feng Shui, you know what it is. It means wind and water, and it's a very important. We can make fun of these ideas, but really they are very important to the Chinese. And in complexes like the Forbidden City, this is basic organization through the principles of Feng Shui. And many of these principles actually have environmental implications. buildings have to face south. Obviously, that's a great solution for environmental reasons. And there's many, many other aspects of it. And unless you understand Feng Shui, you can't do work in China. It's just very difficult. So that's one of the first things we've learned. So when we did this embassy, this is an embassy of Brunei, the Brunei embassy. We respected the principles of Feng Shui, but also as well taking elements of Chinese architectural form. This is in the imperial city, as well as traditional Brunei architecture. Brunei is an Islamic caliphate, a sultanate rather, and so bringing together these two elements with heavy wrought walls for protection, we've created this award-winning embassy on the outskirts of Beijing. Or here in this train station, this was built for the new Beijing 5th line, which is the train station that goes out to the new Olympic Village. And we interpreted the element of qi, or energy. And this is an Olympic line. So again, taking elements of the Olympics and interpreting them in the form of a building, in terms of the tension, the strength, the power of tension that you see here, and interpreting that into this building. Or here in this project in the Maldives, and by the way, this is one of my favorite places to go, a simple island that wasn't big enough to accommodate the program. So using the element of the leaf, extending the island to a series of water villas, which is now completed, and it's really quite beautiful. And also looking at the traditional Maldivian architecture and form, and interpreting that in a modern luxury villa. Here again in Iran, we were designing a museum, a high-rise museum, where the main feature was taking the calligraphy and using that etching that into very thin marble, which when at night would glow through. Was our interpretation, and these are not from the Quran, which you cannot do. You cannot put the Quran on the walls, but these are from Rumi, which is a famous Iranian poet. So elements of the poetry ends up becoming the wrapper for the building. And that's a way of interpreting the local culture. Or in this project in Vietnam, which is a master plan for a new city, and looking at the elements which are important to the Vietnamese. And they are a very ordered society. They always greet people like this, with the symmetry of their bodies. And the lotus is a very important part. So this city culminates in a convention center, which you can see here, which is basically the Lotus Convention Center. It's still in its early stages of planning. Or here, another project in Vietnam, an office building, but we gave it a wrapper. This is a very common element, this Vietnamese dress. So whereas the building is a very simple box, by wrapping it in this form, you're interpreting the way the fabric dresses over. And this project in Vietnam, an international school, bamboo is a very common material there. They use it for a lot of building. And we're using it here in the form of sun shading along the corridors. Okay. In Egypt, this was for a museum project, interpreting the building from the sand dunes. And in Abu Dhabi, a master plan inspired by Islamic geometry. So wherever we work, we begin to find out what are some of the elements in that culture that we can pick on and use, and they become meaningful, and they make sense to the local populace. In this project, which was an award-winning office tower, we took a very simple idea of Islamic geometry, and by simply removing one piece of the pie every 5 stories, we got a 40-story tower, which was the Dubai Islamic Bank. The construction has begun. Unfortunately, it is now put on hold because of economic reasons. But this was an amazing opportunity. And interpreting the oasis, a traditional thing you see in the desert, this residential tower in Dubai introduces the oasis at the rooftop, as well as a series of oases in the middle of the building. These are mini oases with landscaping and water features that mimic what you might see in the desert. In Qatar, part of the new airport interprets the landscape, the moving dunes of the landscape, into a roof form. This was the perspective, and this is the completed building today in Doha, Qatar. And I think one of the last ones in Bangladesh, the High Commission, the British High Commission, completed a few years ago, takes again forms of Islamic architecture and reinterprets them in this facade to cut down on energy. Now, I mentioned Feng Shui in China. In India, they have an entirely different set of rules. They're called Vastu. You're familiar with Vastu? Vastu, which, as you can see the form, it's very, very strict rules about where you can enter a building. For example, you can't enter in the southwest of a building for obvious reasons, but you can enter in the northeast. And so these rules control how architecture is organized. And if you don't know these rules, you really can't work in a country like India. So in this project, everything, this little development, you have to enter in a certain way. So get to know the rules of the local situation. Even when you have a modern brand, and this is our project in Mumbai, this was the Trump Tower, we were talking about that earlier, but even an international brand, when they place their finger on a city, they again have to adopt and accept the local traditions. In this project, the marketing insisted on large balconies and family-type arrangements that you wouldn't have in any other city in the world. But in India, you have to understand how local society works. What are the requirements? This building would not work in Seattle, it wouldn't work in downtown LA, but it works in Mumbai. You know, Samuel Huntington, who is a Harvard scholar, wrote this book, Clash of Civilizations, and it's a very foreboding title. And it suggests that if we don't begin to understand more about each other, we are heading toward a world which is going to be in conflict. And I would like to think of the world being a little bit more optimistic than that. That if we as architects in our own areas begin to understand how other cultures think and work, perhaps we can succeed. This is AirAsia, one of my favorite companies. It's one of the fastest growing airlines in the world, and one of our clients. We've just finished their corporate headquarters. And they celebrate diversity. There's people from all over the world in their marketing material. It's like Benetton. You ever seen the ads by Benetton? For me, that is an aspirational idea. So I'm just going to end with that. And if we have time, do we have time? Okay, I'm going to move on to an interesting, can you do that, Pam? By the way, we have a prize at the end of the talk for anybody who asks the most intelligent question. So think about what the question would be. Okay, if we have time, how much time do we have, Pam? Okay. So this is a topic which is really interesting to me from a professional point of view. This is not about export of services or international blah, blah, blah. This is about our own work in Asia. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. It's about the idea of creating urban communities in the skyline. Let's take you through it. Okay, this is the thesis. Economic and environmental considerations are influencing the verticalization of our cities. And this is especially true in Asia, okay, where growths are absolutely astronomical. So urban spaces and community engagement can no longer be confined to the street plane. You know, what I'm saying here is what you have at the street level, all the interaction, society, community, like Jane Jacobs used to write about the importance of the street. It's true, and it remains true, but it cannot all happen on the street when you have surrounded by 50-story buildings. It has to go somewhere else as well. So urban spaces, gardens, parks, circulation networks, and all of that stuff that we have in our traditional cities and towns, they have to appear in the skyline. Fortunately, technology is allowing us to find solutions to this challenge. And I will show you toward the end of this some case studies where we ourselves are involved in many projects which I think begin to solve the problems of densification of our cities. This is a story of my own city. And I was born, you know, somewhere in here, and the population is now, you know, up to here, and it will be planned to there. Now, for us, that is just a crazy idea, because I grew up in a city of two-story buildings, or maybe four-story buildings, and wide boulevards and trees. But that's not the city that I'm seeing happen, and that's not the city that will be there in the future. We are now here, and our density, by the plan that there is going to be Shanghai or more. And my city of Kuala Lumpur is only this size. It hasn't grown, and it will probably not grow. But more people are moving to the city for economic reasons primarily. Because as you know, anyone who moves to the city, automatically their income level goes up. And so this is a major factor, not just growth of population in terms of natural growth, but people moving to the city for economic reasons. So this is what's happened. Already we've seen the per square foot amount of open space crash, and we expect that it will be averaging about this. This is the ground, meaning the ground plane. So the answer is you need to find other places to get back this. It needs to go somewhere else. And obviously the suggestion is up in the sky. And what does that mean in terms of design? You know, this is Kuala Lumpur about 60 years ago, a few years before I was born, and this is it today. I mean, that is a hell of a transformation. It's almost like a different city. And yet, much of Kuala Lumpur is still planned two-dimensionally. And I'll get to that later on about what does it mean to plan two-dimensionally versus three-dimensional planning. The same is true for many Asian cities. I mean, Boston, when I was here, and Boston now don't look too different. The skyline's about the same, maybe a couple of new towers. But really, you know, the Peru there is, and the Hancock is there, and everything else, a few other new towers. But look at Hong Kong. This is in the same period of about 40 years. Hong Kong went from that to that. Singapore went from, in the last 50 years, went from that to that. And Shanghai, Manila, I can go on and on. The Asian cities have just gone nuts. So how do we deal with that? Cities are growing and therefore becoming more dense at exponential rates, especially in Asia. And within our lifetimes, 75% of the population of the world will be in those cities. So this poses challenges of livability. Innovative solutions need to be found. And these challenges are not limited to transportation, energy consumption, resource and refuse management, and social identity. What does it mean to live in a city of that density where you have neighbors above you, below you, next to you, and everywhere? So one way of dealing with these problems is to think of these cities not as traditionally, planners are 2D plans. They think of plans. That's why they're called planners. So everything's 2D. But I think the cities of the future need to be planned like a matrix, a three-dimensional matrix. Planners who think that way are going to be able to solve the challenges of their city. It's like 2D chess versus 3D chess. It's an entirely different game. You know, looking back on the history of this way of thinking, we find that there's been a lot of thought. And this goes back to the turn of the century. Here in New York, Moses King, he wasn't a planner, but he began to think of the cities of the future. And New York didn't look like this in 1908. But he began to think of cities surviving and living in multiple planes, below ground, at ground, above ground. The city is no longer something that activates only at the ground plane. Especially when you get to this density, the ground plane isn't enough to accommodate all that movement and activity. So you have the underground, you have above ground links, pedestrian links, and in fact, this reminds me of bits and parts of Hong Kong today, or Shanghai, or even parts of Kuala Lumpur, begin to have all these different modes of thinking. This is 1908, shortly after. And by the way, if you haven't seen this movie, please go and get it and watch it. It transformed the way I thought of cities. Everyone seen this movie? Yeah? No. 1926, thank you. Fritz Lang, Metropolis. And he imagined a city, and this is all black and white, which lived at these different levels. Someone imagined these connections back in 1926. It reminds me of Blade Runner. In fact, the movie Blade Runner was inspired by Metropolis, by the way, if you know the history of science fiction and futurism. So for me, when I look at these images from 1927 and the city today, I think maybe when we think about the future cities, we should look at science fiction. And science fiction gives us so much to take from, and perhaps some of these ideas will solve our cities of the future, because all the transportation and movement and life of a city cannot live just at the ground floor anymore. The community has to occupy the skyline, what I call skyscapes. I'm going to bring you back to the GSD, 1986, thesis project. I was already passionate about these ideas. I chose New York City, Times Square, as the center of my thesis project. And I was enamored by Rem Koolhaas and his work with Delirious New York, the idea that cities are living things. They're not just concrete and brick, and that, in fact, buildings themselves had a life of their own. Here we're seeing a bit of incest between the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building. We don't really know what's going on here, but the Rockefeller Center's caught them in the act of something. Yeah, and this is of course, the famous image of the architect of the Chrysler Building, Van Allen. So in my project, which was at the cross-section of the two most exciting parts of New York, Broadway, 7th Avenue, 47th Street, 42nd Street area, imagined a city on its end, basically taking the bits and pieces of the city or a town and putting them into the vertical dimension with a series of elements or objects in space. So Susan, I don't know if you remember this, but Jackson was busy coloring this on the last day before a thesis presentation. So here's my building with a street that runs through it, a series of elevators, escalators that take you into a world, an exciting frame of elements which are gymnasium, clinic, hotel, museum, school, theater, restaurant, theme park. I put a theme park on top of the building. Like, what a crazy idea. Who would put a theme park? Wait till you see my project later on. And an observation deck, and crisscrossing the city with these elements. So this was the idea of a vertical city. And here you can see some Renaissance scholars maneuvering their way through this new crazy idea. No, that was the Apple. The first time we were using Apple. This was Apple, first Apple Macintosh. And of course, I didn't invent these ideas. These go way back. And in Unité d'Habitation by Corbusier, he began to imagine, this is not even a very tall building, that the elements of the city living needed to be organized in the vertical dimension. And you can see how he organized that there. So when I talk about a vertical city, and people must often misunderstand, they think a city like, say, Chicago is a vertical city, but maybe not, because a vertical city really is one which is composed of a network of interconnected buildings where the components of the urban fabric are organized vertically. Parks, offices, gym, clinic, that is a vertical city, not just a bunch of tall buildings, and that's what I want to dispel. And there's a lot of advantages of thinking this way, and these are just some of them. I won't go into detail, but one of the important ones is thinking about energy. Energy. There's something about energy here. Reduced energy consumption. Because when you're dense, your actual per capita usage of energy is actually less. Because you have less to travel, you use public transportation, you're all in the same building. That's why a person living in, say, New York uses much less energy per capita than a person living in Los Angeles. It's well known, because they're all spread out. So these are some of the advantages of this type of living. So basically the idea, you take the horizontal city, which is made up of the main road, highway, the smaller lanes and roads, and you just put it on its end. So the main highway now becomes the main lift core. There are smaller lift cores which serve different parts of the building or the vertical city. There are link bridges perhaps to the next village, which is the next tower. And you take this idea and you then build it. So if you look at the horizontal city is low rise, there aren't much open spaces, and vertical transportation runs a short distance. So to go from one building to the next, you wouldn't have to go far. You just can go down there and up. But what happens, and all the energy of the city can be at the ground plane. Like Jane Jacobs said, that's where the street activity should be. And it works here at the ground level if you have a low-rise horizontal city with low density. But what happens if you then increase your density? What happens if you go up to here? This is where the vertical city solution becomes apparent. Landscape begins to migrate up into the sky, giving you more green space at the ground plane. You can have more parks and more green because you've gone up, and this is in fact higher density than here by 50%. So vertical circulation then becomes a big issue. To go up to visit someone in another building, or if you lived here and worked here, that's a lot of vertical movement. So the idea is you create what Moses King was suggesting, what Metropolis was suggesting. And the activity now becomes community living up there. And that is my dream, that this is the way the future city needs to evolve. So this is what Jane Jacobs said. She was complaining about office buildings and residential towers which ignored the street. And so my answer to Jane Jacobs is, the street is important, but they're more than that. The streets need to migrate up into the skyline and create skyscapes. So the paradigm of before was that's your apartment, and that's maybe where you interact with people. But in the future, the common facilities are located around the building, or in mixed-use developments, if we have different buildings, this is mixed-use developments before, but in the future, we imagine things getting stacked up so that parks, hotels, offices are all in the same high-rise tower. Or in some cases, you can even create bridges between the office tower, the apartment tower, the hotel tower, and this becomes a fully self-sustaining mini city on its own. Now, these solutions are possible because of technology. Structural solutions are allowing us to go higher and higher. I was just here last week, and who knows where this is going to go. We are just allowing ourselves to get taller and taller to deal with densification of our cities. Mechanical and electrical systems, sustainability solutions are also evolving. This is the Shanghai Tower, and it's got a very innovative way to bring fresh air so that you don't have an air conditioning system which serves the whole building. You have multiple HVAC systems which bring in fresh air at every layer of the building. So this is a truly vertical city. Our lifts are getting faster, they're using less energy, and it's incredible. If you look at that Shanghai Tower again, this is like the vertical city diagram I showed you with main lift cores which serve the whole building, but a number of other smaller lift systems which serve clusters and little villages within the overall town of that single building. And lifts themselves, I mean, there's so much technology happening with lifts. We're having double-decker lifts. We have destination-based lifts which help to ease people moving up and down building. And I don't know if you believe this or not. I've seen this functioning. The hyperlift is already in operation. This lift goes up. It then goes sideways, I kid you not. And then it continues up again. ThyssenKrupp from Germany are already producing this lift. And this is going to change the way our buildings can be organized. You should know about how these systems work. Escalators now don't go up single floors. They go up 8 or 10 floors. This is in Hong Kong. And they even go in between buildings. We have lifts crossing streets, which is something I've dreamt of doing, to connect buildings across the street, like my thesis project back in '86. And part of the solution of all this is transportation. Great public transportation needs to be there at the ground or at different levels to make it all work. This is our own Kuala Lumpur map. And we're involved in a lot of the public transportation. This is the MRT lines. These are our MRT stations. We are doing a lot of train station work, and we're doing even the high-speed rail stations. These are the new stations that we've designed in Malaysia. Okay, now I'm going to show you some case studies of how everything I've said, including my thesis project, is now coming to fruition in real life. The first one is a project, a very modest project, called Tribeca. But what's unique about it, it's a mixed-use development with a number of different components, but we've taken part of what is normally found on the street and placed them in these pods in the skyline. So here's a section showing it's made of a hotel, there's office, there's retail, there's residential, and these pods in the sky is basically where people interact. You can see how they're created there, and this is a plan. And this is the rooftop, conventional swimming pool at the rooftop. But the gymnasium pod, the social pod, which is an interactive space, the Zen pod, the jungle pod, they're all placed around the building. So in a way, you're forced to move through the building, and the corridors become streets where you bump into your neighbors. And you actually can say, hello, how are you? Because you're forced to, because everything is distributed in that way. The W Hotel, which is about to be completed, is also a very interesting example of this. We worked on this with SOM out of New York. What we've done is we've taken what is conventionally on the street, which is the reception area, the bars and the restaurants of the hotel. We've taken it up into the sky. There is some on the street, but most of it's now in the sky, which enjoys a view, because you don't enjoy the view from the ground floor. We have hotels and apartments. And here's the interesting thing. We've designed the hotel to have a link bridge to the next tower. So you can now move between towers without ever going to the street. And I'm not denying the importance of the street. The street's important, but it's not the only datum that you need to move between. So here, the sky lobbies, everything's happening up here on level 8, 9, and 10, and that's how you connect to the next building. Here, it's actually going to be handed over now anytime soon. In fact, we're designing the building next door to the W as well. And in fact, that's the same bridge that connects to that bridge. And it will come in to the hotel part of the building. So you can now begin to move between these various towers. And another interesting part of this is the observation deck. I think buildings have a responsibility, almost an obligation, to allow people the public, to be able to use them. I don't like this idea of private buildings which you can't go in. So in this tower, we've insisted on an observation deck to bring people up, and you can see it up there. And these are some images of what the observation deck will be. So in a way, it's what I call democratizing the skyline, allowing people who couldn't otherwise afford a hotel here or an apartment here to be able to enjoy the view that they normally wouldn't see. The Troika is a building designed by Norman Foster. But one of the smart things that Foster did was he created, the Troika means 3 towers, but here in the middle of the building at about level 30, he created a double-story height of link bridges that link all 3 buildings, and that's where the F&B is. The F&B is not at the ground floor. So people get up, and we designed the interiors of all the restaurants there. So for the price of a Coca-Cola, you can now sit up here and enjoy a view of the skyline that you wouldn't otherwise be able to enjoy. A project that's about to start soon is the Skyline. It's a conventional residential development, but it's got some unique things about it. We organized all the community engagement nodes and distributed them throughout the tower. So the corridors and bridges are the places where you interact with the community here. In this plan, you'll see there's a bridge connection linking the 2 towers. There's a lot of interaction here. And the corridors are not corridors. They're streets in the sky, which are naturally ventilated with views to the outside. So no matter where you go, wherever you go through this building, you're always enjoying a street kind of experience. And this is the kind of interaction that we want to see happen throughout the whole tower. Of course, the podium level is where a lot of that action happens, but it's not only where it happens. And we create a lot of little nooks and crannies. Just like in a town, young people want to go to a park and find some time on their own. In a crowded condominium, it's hard. But by creating all these hidden little parks and gardens distributed throughout the building, we have places for young people to be able to go and hang out away from their parents. We talked about bringing the green, the landscape up. And for us, the Datum project is taking that idea really all the way. The office tower and the hotel tower have gardens on the outside, so that you can wind your way and go from the ground floor all the way to the rooftop without ever entering the building, because the staircases are located in these spiral gardens that take you up. And of course, the gardens also are there, and the office as well. So bringing landscape into the towers is a very important part of what we call the vertical city. And in this project, we also did this development next door. There is now decided to be a linkway, a retail linkway, to link this shopping mall with this shopping mall. You can see the bridge here. It's sort of like the Skyline idea. The Highline idea. Yeah, so there it is. We're expecting construction to happen this year. Another project in Johor, this is near Singapore. It's quite a conventional looking tower until you look at it carefully. And here it is. And we've introduced these gardens all the way, even though this is a conventional office tower. And we were able to convince the client to introduce this observation deck where you, for I think $50, you can go up and walk around this glass floor, and get scared out of your wits. I don't know why people want to be scared out of their wits for $50, but it's just a way to get people up and enjoy the view. And you can see Singapore here in the distance. So it's nearing completion now. We always think of the top floors of high-rise buildings as a dead end. You get to the top floor of a tower, where do you go? Back down. Here we've tried to take that idea and turn it on its head. This is an existing tower, and our client bought the site next door and asked us to design a tower there. And he said, well, yeah, you can connect the old building to the new building somehow. But what we decided to do is change the lift core of the existing tower, which is about 20-something stories, and link it back with this bridge to the body of the new tower, which is a mixed-use development with hotel, offices, and so on, and an observation deck. This is what makes the building interesting. The top floor of this office now is not a dead end. It's just another way to get to the building next door. This is the space. It's a 3-story atrium space, and this is where the lounges are. We have a restaurant here, and meeting rooms, and that all activity happens in the connection. So it's the idea of not having a dead end at the top. And of course, we have at the very top, we have the dining area. I'm going to skip this one because we're running out of time. Skip this one here. This is a project that's nearing completion. And what we've done here, this takes the idea of the transportation at the ground floor, which is integral. It's really important for these mixed-use developments to have great public transportation. Otherwise, they don't work. And you create traffic jams. So here we have the train system that comes in. We have a bus and taxi terminal. We even have a ferry terminal, because this is on the waterfront. You can see it's here, it's a ferry terminal. And everything integrates so that the towers do not create a traffic nightmare within the location that they're in. And the project is now, first phase is nearing completion. I've got two more projects to show, and this is where it gets, for me, the culmination of my thinking about vertical city. The Oxley are 3 towers. Let me show you it here. Okay. Looks very much like the diagrams I showed earlier on. We have residential towers, we have hotel towers, and office towers. And these 3 towers are linked by sky bridges into the key lobby areas of the building. And this is where all the activity, all the community activity, the bars, the restaurants, and the clubs are all located. So at level 40, you can see these are the 3 towers, and this is the connector that bridges over all of them. Level 42, it's a 3-story link, and at the very top, at level 55, 56, we have the second bridge that links the 2 other towers. So this is what it will look like. So this is like, all right, it's really happening. We're starting to link these bridges up in the sky. We have 2 great brands there, the Sofitel and the Jumeirah are there. This is just some of the images of what those spaces look like. It's under construction. Another 2 years, it will be completed. The last project I'm going to show. Remember what I said about a theme park? You guys saw this, right? Oh, okay. It's under construction in Kuala Lumpur. It's an 80-story twin tower this is the residential, this is one hotel, and this is another hotel here, and this is a theme park. This is all restaurants and bars and clubs. So these are all the restaurants will have the best view of the city. And there's a high-speed lift core that takes shuttles people from the entrance, drop off straight up into the F&B complex up here. This is what it looks like in section. And I kid you not, we will have a 60-meter diameter Ferris wheel as part of a theme park that's embedded into the top transfer floor of construction. So some of the brands that are there, there's Planet Hollywood on one side and Porsche Design Apartments on the other. Structural system. And this is the lift system. We have 32 lifts in total, and this goes back to the idea of the streets. Each set of lifts handles a different community, and they interact at different points. And I finally got my escalators in the sky. These escalators zigzag across the atriums at level 50. So it's all coming true for me. And the theme park is this 2 floors linking to the wheel at the very top. This is the Porsche Design Suites, which we're working with Porsche out of Germany, Munich, and the Sky Wheel. These are early sketches of how it will work. There are many examples of this around the world. This is in Singapore. It's called the Singapore Flyer. Yeah. And these are some of the brands and restaurants that we're going to be having up there on the skyline. So we'll be seeing this in 2 years. It'll be completed. So, I know that some of the images I've shown, I sometimes get a very negative reaction, like this is a dystopia that you're thinking about. But here's the thing. The cities are getting more dense. What is your solution? Are we going to stop people from moving to the cities? In China, you need a permission to move to the city. Are we ready to do that? Are we going to say, no, we're not allowing people to move to the cities? Or are we going to find solutions to the technology and to the mechanical system, to the structural systems, and to the design solutions that I think are actually available to us? Because frankly, there isn't enough space for all of us to live our dream. We'd all love to live like this on a golf course. But the reality is there isn't enough space on this planet for that. And I don't want to live like this. This is, for me, not my view of a dense urban city. That is not a vertical city. That's a city full of tall buildings. In my view, this is a possibility. And I'm quite happy to live in this city. Thank you. Okay, I'm ready for the brickbats now. I'm ready for the brickbats. Bring it on.
So, I don't know if this is just a comment or a question, but when you said democratization of the city, and you think about the connectors between the buildings, is that infrastructure, is that private construction? How do you keep from having a 2-tiered society where the people who can afford to be on those connectors never have to step foot in a decaying streetscape below. And so I'm just curious, thinking about who puts up that infrastructure and who owns it and who manages it.
Yeah. If you go to some certain cities like Hong Kong, I'm sure many of you have been to Hong Kong, there are already connectors between the cities, between the buildings at various levels. And that's all public infrastructure. Most of it is anyway. In some of the projects we're doing, some of those bridges, actually it's been requirement of City Hall. City Hall says, if you want the extra FAR, we'll give it to you, but you must give us a bridge link to the next tower. So developers, being developers, they will want that, and so they build that extra infrastructure. Now the question is, does it kill the street? I get a lot of this question. Are we killing the street? I don't think so. I think we're just creating other streets. The datum on ground floor isn't the only street. In fact, by making it the only street, you're creating the need to just move so much traffic up and down, which may not be necessary. You could just go sideways. The question is making that public. Okay? So far the work we've done, these are all public spaces. Anyone can go into that last project and just cross over. You don't need permission. To go into private zones, you need pass cards, you need security guards, and so on. So we're fighting hard, making sure these public zones remain public. But it's a battle. Certain developers want some of these spaces to be private. So we have to fight the good fight.
So after going to Kuala Lumpur and seeing your work and everything and walking around, I started to think that this connectivity between buildings is in due part for the thermal comfort of the people in places like Kuala Lumpur, which are terribly humid, in Singapore and Hong Kong and all these places. And so do you see this model of sort of vertical connectivity arising from a necessity to combat that? Just like I can't walk outside if I live in Kuala Lumpur all day, So as well as do you see it? Would you be able to replicate it in a place like here in Boston or elsewhere where it is a bit more comfortable to walk around?
An interesting question, and here's the thing. These links, and there's several others, you've seen them. We have links all over the city now, right? Not so high. Most of them are at level 3, 4, and 5, Because most of them are air-conditioned, or some of them are air-conditioned, but others are not, but they're covered. Because people take them, they're reducing the traffic. And this goes back to city management. These links that I'm talking about encourage people to walk, or in some cases cycle, and therefore reduces the pressure on the street to accommodate all the cars. So my idea is that, yes, this is good for the environment, and people will use it because of weather. And even in cold climates like this, there's parts of the winter where you don't want to walk outside. Seoul, Korea, Tokyo, Japan, a lot of the connections are actually below ground, and they're heated, and you go shopping. So these links, like you saw in Metropolis, should be at all levels, not just below ground or at ground, but also above ground.
You touched on this briefly, I guess, in the answer to the previous question, but right now, from what you've described, we're talking about moving from one building to the next building or a cluster of buildings in the same place. Mm-hmm. But then we've also talked about the need for public transit so that we're not exacerbating existing congestion conditions around a specific building. Have you thought about how this idea scales up to be able to traverse parts of the city at different levels of verticality, beyond maybe just moving on across a pedestrian bridge? I think because you mentioned sort of biking from one place to another, are you envisioning this to scale up to something like being able to go 20 blocks on some sort of either moving walkway or bike paths or even some sort of tram in the sky?
Yeah, we're working on master plans right now, large 100-acre master plans which have dozens of towers. And we are encouraging our clients, not always successfully, but to think of the master plan in multiple levels. So there is a primary transportation level where cars and service vehicles are maneuvering. Then there is a pedestrianized level where people can walk through without ever having to worry about being hit by a car. And that pedestrian level is the primary datum. And then other links and other bridges that connect the towers as you go up. Like you saw in Moses or King or Fritz Lang. So multiple levels. If you have an existing city, an existing condition, it's harder to make the changes. because that means interfering with existing activity in towers. But in some cases, it may be needed. I know that in Hong Kong and parts of Shanghai, they've already introduced these things, working with building owners because it's an advantage to building owners if they have these links. Retail now can happen, not just at the ground. Retail is a very valuable activity. So if you take it up, then you're getting more value above the ground. But certainly when you have a large master plan and you're starting from scratch, it's much easier to implement these things. Good question.
Hi, I'm Yen. I'm from Singapore, and thank you for your talk. So I'm actually very well acquainted with the typology in like Southeast Asia. I'm just interested to know that yes, you have all your innovations on the bridge level, which is usually like the pretty part of the Southeast Asian developments. I'm actually more interested in how you're going to resolve the podium problem. Because in all your developments you have shown so far, there's almost like 6 stories of podium and probably car parking most of the time.
That's right.
And I think that it has to do with the regulation in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore of ridiculous like one retailer to one parking lot, situations that we end up with such situations. So I'm just interested to know how does your firm actually like at least probably in the future attempt to tackle this problem instead of creating like big walls of like ground story retail and then you have like this big fat chunk in the middle.
Yeah, you can see a lot of those chunks.
Yeah.
Yen, is it? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. What he's pointed out is one of the things about Asian cities, we love our cars still, and so we tend to provide too many car parks, and they cannot go below ground because it's too expensive, so they tend to go in these huge boxes of up to 8 stories high of car park. And that is, for me, an impediment to the idea of connecting across. And in fact, if we think about the future city, we shouldn't have so many cars. If you have great public transportation under there or above there, you should not have the private car. In Singapore, what is happening, because of the prevalence of Uber, actually no more Uber, GrabCar just bought Uber, and ride sharing is such a common experience in Singapore. More people take ride sharing than own cars now, that the car parks are becoming empty. In fact, the top floors of car parks in Singapore are being converted into food courts and community work areas. So the future, hopefully, is we don't have those boxes. And I hope that will happen because they are an impediment to creating these links across the sky. And it just encourages more people to own cars, which I think are the biggest disaster for cities.
Thank you very much, David.
I think we have one more. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment probably. I think it's very much related to the last comment on public transportation because I was working on public transportation in Malaysia and from the federal government, they're investing a lot on delivering mass transit projects. So one of my experience was in KL, like if I speak about KL city, it's like a city in layers. So if you really consider at one point of time how many people are on the second layer of the city or third layer of the city, that's quite huge. But my question to you is, I worked on KL Klang region. So KL is very highly, like you have all the towers, high FAR and all that. But when you start going towards Klang, it's more like, so I'm just referring one scholar, T. Barter. He is probably now in Singapore, but he was describing this in terms of automobile-dependent city versus traffic-saturated city. And it's the road length in kilometer per 1,000 person is much higher in Malaysia than other Asian cities. So how do you see the future of like the Klang Valley region when you speak about? Because right now it's not very highly dense. Like you don't have all the towers. It's mostly low-rise development.
Yeah. The visions I've given here are for the CBD. It's for the center of the cities. That when you look at a city skyline, I'm talking about where you see all the highest densification. And by the way, that area is going to grow. And it's going to grow this way, and it's going to go that way. And these are some of the solutions. When you go beyond a certain point and the densities become to drop, the ideas I've talked about are not as valid, okay? But even in those places, the public transportation solutions are just as important. Because whereas in the dense city, one station can serve a few 100,000 people, when you go to the suburbs, a station is not going to serve that many people because everything's much lower and more spread out. And this is where what they call the last mile of connectivity first mile, last mile is really important. So we're doing many stations now in the Klang Valley. The new LRT3, you know about that? We're doing all the stations. But it's not, that will not solve the problem of suburbia, okay? No one's going to walk or cycle 2 kilometers to go into a train station. So that's where, exactly, that's the system. Either you must be within cycling distance or at least a feeder bus system to be able to get that. So planners of transportation need to think beyond just the provision of the main line. It's a whole ecosystem. And it's a very interesting challenge because culturally and by practice, depending on the weather, people will not go a certain point before they get into, or they'll just go in the car. They'll get in the car and they'll take their car, which undermines the whole purpose of the whole system. So it all depends on the density that you're dealing with. Different solutions for different density. These solutions are for the city center, which are getting bigger all the time. Okay, Brad.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.